At my birthday party, my dad stood up and said loudly enough for the whole room to hear, "We all agree you should sell your house and give the money to your sister's baby fund. She needs it more." My cousins cheered, my mom smiled, and my sister wiped fake tears. I just raised my glass, opened my phone, and read out loud a message from the bank that made every fork drop at the table. I, 32M, never expected my 32nd birthday to be the night everything changed. The party was at a decent restaurant downtown, nothing too fancy, but nicer than what I usually went for. I'd picked the place myself and footed the bill for everyone because that's what I always did. My parents, my younger sister, a handful of cousins, a few aunts and uncles. About 20 people total. I'd worked hard to get where I was, and I wanted to celebrate with family. That was my first mistake. The evening started normally enough. Everyone was eating, drinking, making small talk. My sister sat across from me with her husband, and I noticed she kept touching her stomach in that exaggerated way pregnant women sometimes do when they want to make sure everyone remembers they're expecting. She was 4 months along. Mom kept glancing at her with this proud, doting expression that I recognized too well. It was the same look she'd had my entire life whenever my sister accomplished anything, no matter how small. I was used to being the background character in my own family. My sister had always been the golden child. Straight A's that were celebrated like Olympic gold medals, while my solid B's were met with lectures about trying harder. Her college graduation had a party with 100 guests. Mine had a dinner at a chain restaurant. When she got engaged, my parents threw an engagement party that cost more than my entire wedding 2 years ago, which they'd contributed exactly nothing to. I'd stopped keeping score years ago, or at least I told myself I had. The food arrived, and everyone dug in. I was halfway through my steak when Dad stood up. He wasn't a tall man, but when he wanted attention, he knew how to get it. He tapped his glass with a fork, and the table went quiet. I assumed he was going to make a toast, maybe say something nice about me for once. I should have known better. He cleared his throat and looked directly at me. Then he said it, loud enough that tables nearby could probably hear. He told me that everyone at this table agreed on something, that they'd all been talking, and they thought I should sell my house and give the money to my sister for her baby fund because she needed it more than I did. The words hit me like a physical blow. I sat there, fork frozen halfway to my mouth, trying to process what I'd just heard. My house. The 3-bedroom bungalow I'd saved for years to buy. The place I'd renovated myself, spending weekends painting walls and refinishing floors. The first real thing I'd ever owned that was truly mine. He wanted me to sell it and hand the money over to my sister. The table erupted. My cousins started clapping and cheering like Dad had just announced free drinks for everyone. My aunt was nodding enthusiastically, saying something about how family takes care of family. My uncle raised his glass. And my mother, sitting right next to Dad, was beaming at me with this expectant smile, like she was waiting for me to thank them for this wonderful suggestion. My sister wiped at her eyes. Fake tears, the kind she'd perfected in middle school when she wanted to get me in trouble. Her husband had his arm around her shoulders, looking at me with this mixture of hope and entitlement that made my stomach turn. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The restaurant felt too hot, too loud. I could see mouths moving but couldn't process what anyone was saying. Something about my sister's medical bills, about how babies were expensive, about how I was single now after my divorce and didn't really need a whole house to myself. Someone mentioned that I made good money at my job, that I could afford to help out family. Nobody asked me. Nobody had pulled me aside before this dinner and had a conversation. They'd all apparently gotten together, discussed my finances, my property, my life, and decided among themselves what I should do with it. And they'd chosen my birthday dinner, a meal I was paying for, to ambush me with it. I set down my fork carefully. My hands were shaking, but I didn't want anyone to see. I took a sip of water, then another. The table was watching me now, waiting for my response. My sister had this little smile playing at the corners of her mouth, like she'd already spent the money in her head. The thing is, they didn't know everything. They didn't know about the conversations I'd overheard, the little comments that had accumulated over the years. They didn't know that 3 months ago, I'd been suspicious enough to do some digging. And they definitely didn't know what I'd discovered. I pulled out my phone. My hand was steadier now. The shock was wearing off, replaced by something colder and sharper. I scrolled through my emails until I found the one I wanted. The one that had arrived that morning, actually, with perfect timing that I couldn't have planned if I'd tried. I stood up. The table went quiet again. I raised my glass and told them I wanted to make a toast of my own. My voice was calm, almost pleasant. Dad sat down, looking pleased with himself. Mom was still smiling. My sister leaned forward slightly. I told them I'd received an interesting email from the bank that morning. Then I started reading it out loud. The email confirmed the final payment on my house had been processed. I was now the full, unencumbered owner of my property, completely mortgage-free, worth approximately $450,000 in the current market. Forks clattered against plates. My cousin dropped his glass. Someone gasped. But I wasn't finished. I kept reading, my voice carrying across the now silent table. The email went on to reference another matter we'd been discussing. The bank was pleased to inform me that the loan application for my sister and her husband had been declined due to the discovery of fraudulent information on their application. Specifically, they'd listed me as a co-signer and guarantor on a $300,000 loan without my knowledge or consent. My sister's face went white. Her husband was staring at his plate like he wanted to fall through the floor. My mother's smile had frozen into something grotesque. I kept going. I told the table that I'd been suspicious when my credit score had dropped unexpectedly 2 months ago. When I'd investigated, I discovered someone had been using my information. Applications for credit cards, personal loans, even a car lease. All in my name, all with my sister's address listed as the secondary contact. The silence was complete now. Someone's phone was ringing in the background, but nobody moved to answer it. I explained that I'd filed a police report 3 weeks ago. I'd hired a lawyer. I'd contacted the credit bureaus and the banks. Every fraudulent application had been traced back to my sister and her husband. The evidence was comprehensive. My lawyer had told me it was one of the clearer cases of identity theft he'd seen. My father tried to speak, but nothing came out. He looked at my mother, then at my sister. My sister was crying for real now, not the pretty tears from before, but ugly, gasping sobs. Her husband was trying to pull her up from the table, muttering something about leaving. I told him to sit down. My voice wasn't loud, but something in it made him freeze. I continued. I explained that the reason they needed money so desperately wasn't medical bills or baby expenses. They'd racked up over $90,000 in debt through bad investments and gambling. My brother-in-law had gotten involved in sports betting and cryptocurrency schemes. They'd lost everything, maxed out their credit cards, and were facing eviction from their apartment. My aunt started crying. My uncle was staring at my sister like he'd never seen her before. My cousins had gone completely silent. When they couldn't borrow money legitimately anymore, they'd decided to use my identity. They'd applied for loans, credit cards, even tried to take out a second mortgage on my house by forging documents. That last one had failed, thank God, because I'd set up fraud alerts on my property after the first few incidents. My mother found her voice. She asked me how I could do this, how I could accuse my own sister of such things. Her voice was shrill, desperate. She said my sister was pregnant, that I was going to ruin her life. I looked at her. I asked her if she'd known. The question hung in the air. She didn't answer, but her face told me everything. She'd known, maybe not all the details, but enough. And Dad, from the way he was staring at his plate, had known too. This entire birthday ambush had been their way of fixing it. Get me to sell the house willingly, give them money to my sister, and all their problems would go away. I'd be the hero. The family would be saved. Except I wasn't willing to set myself on fire to keep them warm anymore. I told them the police were investigating. My lawyer had sent cease and desist letters. Every credit bureau had been notified. I was pursuing full legal action for identity theft, fraud, and forgery. I'd calculated the damages at around $120,000 when you included the legal fees I'd incurred, the interest on fraudulent accounts I'd had to dispute, and the damage to my credit score. My sister was begging now. She said she was sorry, that they'd been desperate, that they'd planned to pay it back. Her husband was silent, head in his hands. I told her that being desperate didn't give her the right to steal my identity and my future. I asked her if she'd thought about what would have happened if I hadn't caught it. If those loans had defaulted, I would have been responsible. My house could have been seized. My credit would have been destroyed. My entire life would have been derailed. And for what? So they could cover their gambling debts? Dad tried a different approach. He said I was being selfish, that family helped each other. He brought up times they'd helped me, loans I'd borrowed as a teenager, the time they'd let me stay with them after college for 6 months while I found a job. I reminded him I'd paid back every penny I'd ever borrowed. With interest. And I'd paid rent for those 6 months, even though he liked to pretend I hadn't. I kept every receipt, every bank transfer. I pulled up my phone again and showed him the records. The table was disintegrating. My aunt was arguing with my uncle. My cousins were whispering furiously among themselves. One of them, the one who'd cheered the loudest earlier, tried to say something about forgiveness and moving forward. I turned to him. I asked if he'd be willing to forgive someone who stole $100,000 from him. I asked if he'd be willing to hand over his house to cover someone else's gambling debts. He shut up quickly. My mother was crying now too, saying I was tearing the family apart. She begged me to reconsider, to think about the baby. I told her I'd thought about almost nothing else for 3 weeks. I'd thought about how my sister's child would be raised by parents who saw nothing wrong with stealing from family. I'd thought about how my parents had been complicit, how they'd probably encouraged this whole scheme. I'd thought about every birthday, every holiday, every family event where I'd been overlooked and undervalued while my sister was celebrated for simply existing. This wasn't about one incident. This was about a lifetime of being told I didn't matter as much. And I was done. I told them I was pursuing full prosecution. My sister and her husband would likely face criminal charges. They'd definitely face civil penalties. My lawyer was confident we'd win damages that would cover my costs, and then some. And my house. I was keeping it. In fact, I was keeping everything. I was cutting them all off completely. My sister screamed at me. She called me heartless, cruel, a monster. She said she hoped I'd be happy alone in my big, empty house with nobody who loved me. I told her I'd rather be alone than surrounded by people who only valued me for what they could take. I stood up, pulled out my wallet, and dropped enough cash on the table to cover my meal alone. I told them they could figure out the rest of the bill themselves since they were so good at making financial decisions for other people. Then I walked out. Update 1. It's been 2 weeks since the birthday dinner. The aftermath has been exactly as messy as you'd expect. My phone exploded that night. Texts, calls, voicemails from every family member who'd been at that dinner and several who hadn't. Most of them were telling me I'd overreacted. A few were begging me to reconsider for the sake of family unity. My mother left me a voicemail that was 20 minutes of her crying and telling me how disappointed she was in the man I'd become. I blocked every single one of them. My lawyer called the next morning. The bank had provided additional evidence that my sister and her husband had attempted to access my accounts multiple times over the past 6 months. They tried to add themselves as authorized users on my credit cards. They'd called my bank pretending to be me, trying to get information about my balances. The bank's security protocols had stopped most of it, but not everything. The police investigation was moving forward. The detective I'd been working with told me they had more than enough evidence for charges. The district attorney was reviewing the case. My sister and her husband hired a lawyer. Their lawyer contacted mine, proposing a settlement. They'd pay back what they'd stolen in monthly installments if I agreed to drop the criminal charges. I refused. My mother showed up at my house 3 days ago. I didn't answer the door. She stood outside for 40 minutes, alternately yelling and crying, telling me I was destroying my sister's life. She said the stress was affecting the pregnancy, that I'd have blood on my hands if something happened to the baby. I called the police and filed a trespassing complaint. The extended family has chosen sides. Most of them sided with my sister because family drama is always the fault of whoever refuses to play along. But a few reached out privately. My cousin, one who hadn't been at the dinner, called to say she'd had money go missing a few years ago and had always suspected my sister, but never had proof. My uncle from my mother's side sent me a text saying he understood what I was doing and why. The surprising messages came from people I barely knew. Old high school friends who'd heard about it through the grapevine. Co-workers who I confided in. My ex-wife, who I hadn't spoken to in over a year since the divorce was finalized. She told me she'd always thought my family treated me poorly and she was glad I was finally standing up for myself. Work has been a refuge. My boss knows what's happening in general terms, and he's been understanding about me taking calls from lawyers during work hours. My coworkers have rallied around me in quiet ways, extra coffee showing up on my desk, people checking in without being intrusive. The house feels different now, emptier in some ways, but lighter too. I've started redecorating, changing things that I'd kept a certain way because of my ex-wife's preferences or because I thought family might visit. I'm making it mine in a way I never did before. My sister's lawyer contacted mine again yesterday. They're getting desperate. Apparently, the criminal charges are proceeding, and it's worse than I thought. The forgery charges alone carry serious penalties. The identity theft compounds it. My brother-in-law might be looking at actual prison time. Part of me feels guilty. It's the part that was trained from childhood to put family first, to smooth things over, to be the reasonable one who compromises. That part keeps whispering that maybe I should show mercy, that maybe I'm taking this too far. But then I remember standing in that restaurant, listening to my own father tell me to give up my house at my birthday dinner without ever asking me first. I remember the applause, the cheers, my mother's smile. The years of being second place, second choice, second thought. I'm not backing down. Update 2. 1 month since the dinner. Everything has moved faster than I expected. The charges were filed officially. My sister and her husband were arrested last week. They were released on bail that my parents paid for by taking out a loan against their own house. I found this out through my uncle, who's been keeping me updated on things I wouldn't otherwise know. The criminal trial is scheduled for 3 months from now, but the civil case is proceeding separately. My lawyer has filed for damages totaling $160,000. We increased the amount after discovering additional fraudulent accounts they'd opened. My parents tried a different approach. They hired a family friend who's known me since I was a kid to reach out. He called me asking if we could meet for coffee, just to talk. I agreed, mostly because I was curious what angle they'd try next. He spent an hour trying to appeal to my better nature. He said my sister was devastated, that she'd made mistakes but didn't deserve to have her life ruined. He mentioned the baby repeatedly, like that was supposed to be a trump card. He suggested that maybe my parents' approach had been wrong, but my response was disproportionate. I asked him if he'd ever had someone steal his identity. He admitted he hadn't. I asked him if he'd be willing to lose $100,000 and just forgive it because family. He got quiet. Then I asked him the question that had been bothering me. I asked him when exactly my parents had approached him to have this conversation. He was honest enough to admit it had been 2 days after my birthday, before I'd gone to the police, before I'd known the full extent of the fraud. They'd been trying to manage me from the start. The birthday ambush wasn't a spontaneous idea. It had been planned, probably for weeks. They'd gathered the family, orchestrated the pressure, expected me to cave under the combined weight of familial obligation. I thanked him for the coffee and told him this was the last time we'd speak. The fallout in the extended family has been fascinating to watch from the outside. There's apparently been several screaming matches at family gatherings I'm no longer invited to. My aunt is furious with my parents for putting the whole family in this position. Some of my cousins are demanding to know if my sister ever tried to steal from them too. One cousin reached out to tell me that several family members have checked their credit reports and found suspicious activity. Nothing as severe as what happened to me, but enough to make them realize my sister and her husband had been working this scheme for a while. The family WhatsApp group I was removed from has apparently imploded. People are sharing screenshots of conversations where my parents had been asking various family members to loan money to my sister over the past year. Always with sob stories, always with promises of quick repayment. Nobody's seeing any of that money back now. My sister's pregnancy has become complicated. I heard through the grapevine that she's having stress-related issues and has been put on partial bed rest. My mother sent me an email, the only one that got through before I blocked her address too, telling me that if my sister loses this baby, it will be my fault. That one hurt more than I want to admit. But my therapist, who I started seeing 2 weeks ago, has been helpful in processing it. She pointed out that my sister made her choices well before there was a pregnancy to consider. The consequences of those choices aren't my responsibility. The house continues to be my sanctuary. I've been hosting friends, something I rarely did when I was married or when I was still entangled with my family. People who actually value me, who don't see me as a resource to be exploited. It's been good. My lawyer called yesterday with news. My sister's lawyer has made another settlement offer. They'll admit to everything, pay full restitution over 10 years, and serve probation instead of jail time if I agree to ask the prosecutor to reduce charges. I'm considering it, not because I feel sorry for them, but because my lawyer pointed out that a 10-year payment plan with interest plus probation records might actually be better than them declaring bankruptcy after a criminal trial. I'd get my money back and they'd still have criminal records. But I haven't decided yet. Part of me wants to see this through to the end. The part that spent 32 years being told I wasn't worth as much as my sister wants her to face full consequences. I have a meeting with the prosecutor next week. I'll decide after that. For now, I'm doing something I never thought I'd do. I'm planning a trip to Europe, something I've wanted to do for years but always put off because of money or family obligations or my ex-wife's preferences. I'm going alone. For 3 weeks. I'm taking my life back, piece by piece. And it feels good.